Thank you, Diane. Good morning. My name is Clara Jimenez, and I am today's service coordinator. Welcome all to North Chapel. Our pastor, Reverend Dr. Leon Dunkley, is here today, and he will be delivering today's reflection entitled Forgiving Helens. But first, a few announcements. If you are new to North Chapel or are visiting us, welcome, and please consider signing our guest book, which is at the back of the sanctuary. There you will also find hearing assistance devices and large print versions of the hymns and order of service should you need them. Monica is here today to lead the children on spiritual exploration. And after the service, we invite you to visit with each other in the coffee social hall. Although today we also have a special event. We have a community conversation to which all of you are invited. This is not a members-only event. This is a community conversation, and you are very welcome to join us. There are other exciting things happening today in North Chapel and this week. In particular, please look at the announcements for our Tales of Fall Woodstock, which is a fundraiser for North Chapel, and is a reading. I have here. It's a stage reading of the stories of the founding of Woodstock and its first 100 years. And you have there some of the characters that are part of that story. Sherry Belial has suggested that if you are a member of North Chapel or a regular attendant, please wear your tag with your name so other people who are our guests know about our opening to our audience. Also notice that next week, I see in the announcement that we have this stress course at North Chapel, and we also are reopening after a 3-year hiatus our chamber music concert series. So they will start next Sunday, and I am very excited about the return of all these events. Finally, please, if you have a cell phone or something that can disturb the service, we ask you to silence it or just turn it off. June is Pride Month, the celebration of the LGBTQ community. And the selection of June is founded on the commemoration of the Stonewalling riots. On June 28, 1969, the uprising of some bar patrons tired of being harassed by police ignited a liberation movement that brought a community out of shame, secrecy, legal codes, mental health codes, and illegality to reclaim their visibility and their right to equality. On a happy coincidence, 46 years later, almost to the date, on June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court issued their decision in Obergefell versus Hodges, recognizing the right to marry of same-sex couples. And while this is an astonishing accomplishment, the current political climate is scary, and we need to pay attention. This year, as of this weekend, a record 491 anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced in state legislatures. This already doubles the number of bills passed in 2022, and is about 5 times as many as they were filed in the entire year of 2015, the year of the same-sex marriage constitutional decision. These bills run the gamut, banning books and censoring academic curriculum, enacting Don't Say Gay policies that silence families and teachers, taking away protections from discrimination in employment and public accommodations, denying gender-affirming care, There is an all-out backlash that affects particularly transgender individuals, but queer youth in general. There are misinformation campaigns feeding fear and hate to gather votes, and hate doesn't need more feeding. If you follow the news, you can see this year's backlash everywhere. It's disrupting school events. Just last Friday, there was a riot in an LA elementary school because of a celebration of Pride. And they are attacking youth in social media. They are intimidating corporations. This is all very scary. But in true Pride spirit, I also want to acknowledge the bravery and fabulousness of the community and their allies. For example, I want to celebrate the high school here in Woodstock, which hosted a statewide queer prom in May and invited the students from all over the state. In the current climate, this is a brave and also necessary step. The teachers and faculty advisors deserve our gratitude. A quote in the Vermont Standard about this event by one of the sophomores in attendance caught my eye and broke my heart. They say, "We're tired of living in a world that hates our existence seemingly. I'm glad we could provide a space for queer youth Vermonters to exist, even for a couple of hours. May we aspire to a world where each of us finds space to exist, always." And here in their honor, there is a poem, Summer by Chen Chen. You are the ice cream sandwich connoisseur of your generation. Blessed are your floral shorterolls, your deeply pink fanny pack with travel-size lint roller, just in case. Level of splendiferous in your outfit, 200. Types of invisible pain stemming from adolescent disasters in classrooms, locker rooms, and quite often Toyota Camrys, at least 10,000. You are not a Jigglypuff, not yet a Wigglytuff. Reporters and fathers call your generation the worst, which really means queer kids who could go online and learn that queer doesn't have to mean disaster or dead. Instead, queer means splendiferously you, and you means someone who knows that common flavors for ice cream sandwiches in Singapore include red bean, yam, and honeydew. Your powers are great and growing. One day, you will create an online personality quiz that also freshens the breath. The next day, you will tell your father, "You were wrong to say that I had to change. To make me promise, I would. To make me promise and promise." We will enter now a moment of meditation.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, I wanted to share this poem with you today, and it reflects on some events that happened a few years ago, not yesterday. All of it. Remember the fluctuating sea, morning on the beach, the sun's orange disk, like a porthole into divine fire. Remember the seals, one then another, bobbing up as if to play or say hello. Remember the swim, the sharp rock, the gash on your leg. Remember the bee sting, reddening your ear, the itch and swelling, with something to tell the wandering mind. Remember the hard walk, the cobblestones, the steps on the path. Remember the church services, the vespers, the nuns blessing your knee. Remember the time not long ago, a day closed you into an ambulance, your heart beating too fast to bear. Remember being lifted up in the air, waving goodbye, calling out, Tell the children, please. Remember the peace in returning to dogs, to house, to your wife, Clara, lit within. Remember swimming in the pond again, in a body made new by gratitude. Thank you.
Wow, that was beautiful. Good morning. Forgiveness is like the lingering scent of divinity in life, and what grows from it can be like heaven here on earth. Brokenhearted from an unrequited love, I took pen to paper back in my more self-righteous songwriting days. I wanted to write something lovely and spiteful, something that would make my lover miss me and return to relationship, which did not work. I had not done my work. I was hurting inside. I was grieving, hoping that romance would help me to avoid that pain, help me to avoid the harder surfaces and the sharper edges of life that caused that pain. I wanted to write something beautiful to prove my own self-worth. I struggle with that sometimes. We all struggle with that sometimes. When we can prove to one another that we are beautiful, when we can prove this to ourselves, redemption and grace become possible, maybe even near at hand. So I sat down and I wrote the best words that I could write, and I poured what beauty I could into the words, but not into the meaning. I was jealous at the time of what seemed like her ability to move on so easily from me. I was young, still in my 20s. I couldn't get but so far beyond myself. I had no idea what she was going through. I just wrote from my perspective, self-righteously. It's easier that way. And then I reproduced the issues that she and I had struggled with in relationship after relationship until I healed my own heart. And I couldn't heal my own heart without forgiveness. In my late 20s, I wrote a song called Lightly Upon the Sky, and I thought it was very beautiful, and I wrote it to her. I wrote, when you go, walking so lightly, and when clouds seem the first footsteps of an angel in the blue, and when down below my thoughts are heavy, somehow I knew you wouldn't want to be on the other side of the sky. So I did my best to close the distances between you and I, but good God, throw the light on me. I never thought I'd hunger for your higher heart. But in the end, I'd been chasing for what scraps I could find and begging on the poor man's line again. I couldn't get the attention that I was needing. I couldn't get the affirmation and the affection that I was desperate for. So I wrote, Somehow I knew you wouldn't want to see the pattern that you'd leave behind you. And I knew you wouldn't want to be part of our needing to resign, but hear me out a moment's time, and don't dare believe that you don't owe this much to me. Does something of our love remain, or does memory of it touch too painfully when you go, walking so lightly, when clouds seem the first footsteps of an angel in the blue, and when down below my thoughts are heavy because I could never follow you? Although all along I would try, by tracing your travels ever so lightly upon the sky, and by damning everyone within the spell of my laughter to these fairy tales of you. Oh, how my heart had been bleeding in the days when I was needing to believe in them too. But my secret is in the sand. And like the myth of the man in the moon, I share no deeper understanding should you close your hand too soon. And when I said, hold on to tomorrow, I was newly heartful and born of an honest try. But I fell empty, breaking, hollow, oh my love. What strange and lasting blood shed strong on your last good reasons why, but still you'll go, walking so lightly, and clouds will seem the first footsteps of an angel walking in the blue, blue sky. I still love the beauty of that song, but I was so broken. I couldn't find the good way to forgiveness. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in that situation? The first time I went to the Northwest, the first time I saw that famous mountain in Oregon with my own eyes, I was surprised. Mount St. Helens seemed almost calm, much more resolved than I thought she would be even after all of this time. I drove across the United States for the first time in 1988, and I saw Mount St. Helens 37 years ago. 43 years ago, on the 18th of May in 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in violence and catastrophe. She darkened the sky. She took the lives of 57 people, including the 83-year-old Harry R. Truman, not to be confused with Harry S. Truman, the 33rd President of the United States. Mount St. Helens was overwhelmed with herself. She overwhelmed herself with her own force and power. She stomped her feet in anger on the earth until it quaked beneath her. 5.1 on the Richter scale, everyone around her was shaken. She threw 3 cubic kilometers of earth into the heavens and heaved lava down her body, the mountainside, molten like an earthen tidal wave. What remained of her at the peak, her summit after the eruption, was 1,300 feet lower than it had been the day before. She made a mile-wide crater in a matter of minutes and sent a vertical plume of ash 16 miles into the sky, and I thought to myself, reflecting honestly, I've had days like that. There have been times in life when I've been so caught up in the tensions of life that I too have stomped my feet, I too have quaked the earth, and I too have darkened the sky for those around me in terrible ways. And that yet there she was before me, Mount St. Helens in all her glory, just as peaceful as a sleeping baby child. She was calm, much more at peace than I imagined she'd be, and how quickly the life had returned to her after she'd scorched the earth. Of course it did. She had found an honest way to the gifts of forgiveness. Forgiveness being that precious agreement that we make with and within ourselves to see the world as it actually is, with no violence and no anger and no wayward self-righteousness standing in the way. Mount St. Helens found her way to forgiveness. What would it mean if you and I were to do the same? Years later, when I was in my 30s, I took pen to paper once again. I was 10 years more mature. I knew more about my spirit. I knew more about what I believed. I knew that I believed in something that was absolutely strong, mountainously strong. I knew that I believed in something that was unceasingly powerful, something that resides within the soul of each and every one of us. I believed then in that great mountain that erupted all those years ago. I still believe in that mountain. I believe that she works for us or against. The choice is ours. But I still believe in a mountainous volcano that lost itself in its own violent rage. And I believe in looking out up into the open depths of my own soul, and in flying with both feet in Portland. In the song, I confessed that I don't believe in angels. I'm too busy falling from the heavens myself, tripping on my own wings. And I don't believe in miracles when there's still this much going wrong with the world, eyes on the mirror of yesterday. And I confess that I don't believe that Jesus would be very pleased with how I keep falling down, would be very pleased about these tears in my heart and how I can't quite keep my feet on the ground, but I believe in this mountainous volcano that lost itself in its own violent rage. And I believe in walking out up into the open depths of my own soul and in flying with both feet in Portland. Joanne Boyle picked the picture for the covers of our orders of service today. I would never have imagined using that photo. As soon as she suggested it, I knew that it was perfect. A perfect example of what can happen to us when we fall shy of forgiveness, when we allow ourselves to erupt. As the song concluded, I admitted that I don't believe in violence, or in these sorrows that I keep on the shelf, in the impossible angers that I fire at you, or the invisible arrows that I aim at myself. But I believe in a mountainous volcano that lost itself in its own violent rage, and I believe in walking out up into the open depths of my own soul and in flying with both feet in Portland. What happens to us when we fall shy of forgiveness? If the picture on the covers of the orders of service is any indication, it isn't anything good. Failing forgiveness, we may become explosive and we may erupt in violence and catastrophe. We may darken the sky and overwhelm ourselves with the force of our own rage. We angrily stomp our feet until the earth quakes beneath them. We may crumble houses and shake the bones of those we love. Finding forgiveness, all of these can change. There's a blues musician, a singer, and a wonderful guitarist named John Mayer. He writes, "Gravity is working against me. Gravity always wants to bring me down. Oh, I'll never know what makes this man, with all the love that his heart can stand, dream of ways to throw it all away. Oh, gravity is working against me, and gravity always wants to bring me down." Now, what's the opposite? What's the opposite of gravity? In a book entitled Grace and Gravity, or actually it's called Gravity and Grace, Simone Weil writes that all the natural movements of the soul are controlled by laws that are analogous to the laws of gravity. Grace is the only exception. Grace is the opposite of gravity. It is the denier of gravity. It is the defier of gravity, and forgiveness is its key. Forgiveness is like the lingering scent of divinity in life, and what grows from forgiveness can be just like heaven here on earth. Sometimes it seems to me that the more traditional Christian faiths have an easier time with forgiveness. Its very essence, forgiveness is the very essence of Jesus and his journey. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. I don't know if it's actually any easier for them than it is for us, but forgiveness is built into that tradition so explicitly. It is structured in Christianity, less so in Unitarian Universalism, the way we practice Unitarian Universalism, that is. Reverend Scotty McLennan is a leading theologian of our movement. He's a minister and a lawyer and an educator currently working at Stanford University. For 14 years, he was the chaplain at Tufts University, which is where I met him. I met him 40 years ago when I was 18 years old. I can't believe I can say 40 years ago when I was 18 years old, and I am in powerful company, so I know that I'm gonna hear about that. So anyway, we all thought that Scotty was the coolest, and not just because he was a part of a character on Doonesbury. Do you remember the Doonesbury cartoon? Gary Trudeau built a character named the Reverend Scott Sloan. Scotty's mentor was William Sloane Coffin. So the Scott for Reverend Scott Sloan comes from Scotty McLennan, and the Sloan comes from William Sloane Coffin, and that's, I don't know if you've seen that picture in the cartoons, that's the sort of cartoon likeness of my former mentor on the cover of a book called Finding Your Religion. From the beginning, he's written a bunch of books. He's written Finding Your Religion. He wrote a book called Church on Sunday, Work on Monday, and he wrote a book called Jesus Was a Liberal. He wrote a book in 2016 called Christ for Unitarian Universalists, A New Dialogue with Traditional Christianity. From the onset, he made his intentions quite clear. His introduction reads, "Why in the world a book on Christ for Unitarian Universalists?" Less than 20% of us Unitarian Universalists identify as Christians, but more than 70% of Americans identify as Christian. We UUs are only 0.3% of Americans' population at best. So primarily this is a book that helps us talk intelligently about Christ with our Christian friends. Scotty explains that historically Unitarian Universalists used to be in much closer dialogue with mainstream Christianity. Not so much anymore, and I don't believe that we are the better for that. Scotty asks again, why in the world a book on Christ for Unitarian Universalists when we virtually never use the title for this historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth? He reminds us that most of his faithful followers refer to themselves and others who stand in the tradition of Jesus as Christians, not as Jesusians. Why? Because they tend to be interested in, and I'm quoting here, they tend to be less interested in Jesus of history than in the Christ that is present in their faith. Jesus lives with them in their daily lives now as the Christ. Christ is an honorific title that technically means the anointed one of God. For most Christians, Jesus is the post-Easter Christ, the resurrected Christ, who is actually with them right now in real time, who companions them, comforts them, and challenges them in their daily lives, not just a prophet and a teacher from first century Israel. Like I said, Scotty is an excellent writer, especially when he writes about forgiveness, and he does that powerfully by way of a Jewish man named Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal was a Holocaust survivor. He died in 2005. During his time in a concentration camp in Poland, he was taken out of the concentration camp to a hospital room of a dying 21-year-old SS officer. This Nazi wanted to confess to a Jew a wartime atrocity that he had committed a year before. He explained that he would not be able to die in peace if he could not repent and receive forgiveness from a Jew. And what would you do? What would you do if such a gesture of forgiveness were asked of you? Would you forgive the Nazi on his deathbed in the hospital? I suppose there are arguments either way, but the most salient one being, have the preconditions for forgiveness been met? Namely, is the forgiving party still at risk of further injury? The way I understand it, the turning of the other cheek is a strategy of compassion. It's a gesture undertaken in order to reveal to the aggressor the error of their way. If the aggressor is unrepentant and still at large and still dangerous, we are not yet within the reach of the blessing of forgiveness. Another poet writes that there are rifles buried by the countryside. By the rising of the moon, may they lie there long forgotten until they rust away into the ground. Who will end this ancient hatred and will the killing to an end? Who will swallow long injustice and take the devil for a countryman? Who will say this far, no further, if I die today? Send no weapons, no more money. Send no vengeance across these seas, just the blessing of forgiveness to my new countryman and me. Missing brothers, martyred fellows, and silent children in the ground. Could we but hear them, would they not tell us that it's time to lay God's rifle down? Who will say, this far, no further, if I die today, O Lord? This far, no further are words taken that are maybe unfamiliar to 21st century Unitarian Universalists, but they were written by a 19th century Unitarian minister named James Russell Lowell. He reminded us of the possibility of excellence when he wrote that it is mediocrity that makes laws and sets man-traps and spring guns in the realm of free song, saying thus far shalt thou go, and no further. This far and no further. James Russell Lowell is best remembered for writing, once in every man and nation comes a moment to decide, in the strife of truth and falsehood for the good or evil side. He is so remembered for writing this by Martin Luther King, who closed perhaps his most famous speech by saying, we shall overcome. Because Carlyle is right and no lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right and no truth crushed to earth, and that truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right, truth forever on the scaffold, forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways to the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch over his own. Deep in my heart I do believe, may we remember James Russell Lowell for the beauty and the power of his words, and for the wisdom of his thoughts. So once again I ask you, would you forgive the Nazi on his deathbed? Do you know what Simon Wiesenthal chose to do? Simon Wiesenthal did not condemn the young Nazi. He simply chose to listen and to remain silent, and then to leave the room. He wondered if he'd done the right thing, and his wonder provoked responses from Robert McAfee Brown, who served as a chaplain at Stanford University, from a child psychiatrist and Christian author named Robert Coles, from Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa, from the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and his daughter Susanna Heschel, who was a professor at Dartmouth at the time, from Rabbi Harold Kushner, and from the Dalai Lama, and from the convicted Nazi war criminal Albert Speer, and from 40 other people as well. It was a complicated, unreal question. What real answer sets us free? Now, I don't know, so I turned to a more contemporary example. I started reading a brand new book on the subject. I started reading a book on forgiveness, an alternative account by a Harvard Divinity professor named Matthew Ichahasi Potts. He begins with the example of what happened in South Carolina in June of 2015, when a young 21-year-old white supremacist named Dylan Roof walked into the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina and killed 9 people whose heads were bowed in prayer. At his arraignment, at the arraignment of Dylan Roof, several, but not all of the victim's surviving family members, and I'm quoting here, offered forgiveness to Roof through a closed circuit television feed to the jail where he was being remanded. I forgive you, Nadine Collier, the daughter of 70-year-old Ethel Lance, said through tears. You took something precious from me, and I will never talk to her again. I will never hold her again, but I forgive you. Bethane Middleton Brown, the sister of the slain DePayne Middleton doctor, said to Roof, I acknowledge that I am very angry, but we have no room for hating, so we have to forgive. I pray God on your soul. Wanda Simmons, the granddaughter of victim Daniel Simmons, spoke directly to Roof, saying, although my grandfather and other victims died at the hands of hate, this is proof. Everyone's plea for your soul is proof that they lived in love and their legacies will live in love. Hate won't win. Maybe this is the powerful blessing that causes the deeper soul to wonder. Forgiveness, the book continues. Observing these public acts of forgiveness during an interview, the writer Tanahashi Coates wondered out loud, is this real? I question the realness of that. Tanahashi Coates found this gesture to be unbelievable, yet it is humanly possible to love beyond belief. So what do you say, friends? What is it that you believe? How is it that you will choose to engage the blessing of forgiveness? I think that starting small is the key. I think it's not wise to start by forgiving mountainous volcanoes in our first attempt. Forgiveness is a practice. It requires great effort and training. Few of us can run the whole marathon without months of preparation. We have to put in the time and get ourselves good and ready for big things, and we can do big things. Forgiveness is big, and it happens in its own time. In young love, we find forgiveness in order to heal the broken heart. At the foot of Mount St. Helens, we find forgiveness in the flowers that grow in the wake of catastrophe, in the peace that calls us on. We find forgiveness being that arrangement, that agreement we make within ourselves to see the world as it actually is. We find forgiveness so that we don't erupt like Mount St. Helens did. We find forgiveness so that hate won't win. We find forgiveness to defy an ancient gravity that always tries to bring us down. As Simone Weil says, all the natural movements of the soul are controlled by the laws analogous to the laws of gravity. Grace is the only exception. Grace is the opposite of gravity. It is the denier and the defier of gravity, and forgiveness is the redemptive key that says this far, no further. And this sacred line we draw is the lingering scent of divinity. And what grows from this line is heaven here on earth. May it be so. Blessed be. And amen.